Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Michael Dalvi, gentleman at large who lives in the Doon Valley in Dehradun at the foothills of the Himalayas, far away from COVID-saturated Delhi where I am. A former cricketer, Mr. Dalvi, you played for India. But the reason you're my subject today is because you're the son of Brigadier John Parashram Dalvi, who fought in the 1962 war with China, was taken prisoner in then NEFA, Northeastern Frontier Agency, now Arunachal Pradesh, and was a prisoner of war of the Chinese for about 7 months, the highest ranking Indian Army officer. Welcome to the print.
Thank you. And you forgot to say he was in solitary confinement.
He was in solitary confinement for how long?
The whole time, except for around the end of April, when he met his officers.
Right.
And they were being taken to Beijing, Peking those days.
Yes.
And he had this suspicion that they were going to parade all our troops and officers in the May Day parade.
Uh-huh.
So he put his foot down. The ambassador of the time, our ambassador, was also very aggressive about this subject. It was against the Geneva Convention, and finally they dropped the idea.
Right.
So he and his officers watched the parade rather than participate in it.
In Beijing? In Peking?
In Peking, yes.
Right.
A little aside to the story.
Well, it's a story of India in a sense that these young army officers fought a war under-equipped, underfed, underclothed, underarmed. But the reason we are here today, and I'm talking to you, is for two reasons. One is that you just celebrated his 100th birth anniversary a few days ago. And the second is that India and China have been in the middle of a border conflict, you may call it. It's not a conflict really, but they have been engaged in these violent clashes over the last several weeks, are now disengaging. But this is perhaps a good time to take another look at the story of your father, Brigadier Dalvi. So your first comments.
Well, thank God for one thing, we are so much better prepared now, better equipped, state-of-the-art weaponry.
Right.
And man for man, I have absolutely, from what I have read and what I've heard, man for man, our troops are so much better than them, so much better. Mm-hmm. Because, first of all, ours is a volunteer army.
Yes.
Theirs is an army of conscripts. The guy is just picked up from somewhere, given a uniform, given a weapon, and told go and fight. Mm-hmm. Our boys have another thing going for them, which is the izzat of their paltans, their battalions. That is of greatest import to the Indian soldier. The Jawan is a very simple, comes from peasant stock, brave like you cannot imagine. I think you may have read what I had said on my father's anniversary. They fight only for their paltans, for the glory of their country, for their CO Saab. You saw what happened with the CO of Bihar, whatever, 16th Bihar, I think.
That's right, the Colonel Santosh.
They heard that he had been molested or whatever, he had been attacked.
Assaulted.
I mean, they dropped everything, assaulted, dropped everything to go to him. That kind of spirit, I don't think the Chinese have. We'll teach them a pretty good lesson this time, if they try anything.
I also want to say that your father wrote this really beautiful book called Himalayan Blunder. And while a physical copy is somewhere in this library and I cannot find it in the middle of this lockdown, but you've sent me a PDF and I'd like to, on behalf of you, volunteer to all the viewers of this interview that if anybody wants to read it, I can send them a PDF version of it. But if you would like to talk a little bit about the book, how and why, and whether you have personally achieved closure after so many years.
Yes, closure in the sense that, by the time he died, which was in 74, I think he had come to, right in the end, when he was in hospital for 6 weeks in Bombay, Ashwini, INS Ashwini, which is the military hospital, he had kind of resigned himself. Now there's nothing more I can do. And if you see in his book, he has dedicated the book to all ranks of 7 Brigade who either lost their lives or who were captured or who a lot of other things happened to them in the military. Okay? Where he said that his book is a written tribute which should go down forever as a memorial to them. So I think he had come to terms with, he had come to some kind of a peace towards the end. And the main thing that, energized the man's heart and soul was the fact that could he have done something else? There are some army officers who actually thought that he should have resigned, which is how could a commander of 4,000 or 5,000 troops right on the border, on the Namkachu River, the Mahatmon line, resign and leave his troops and run away from there? A man who had spent 4.5 years in the Burmese jungles fighting a war. Inconceivable that he would have even have thought that, but there were people who thought he should have done that. This rankled with him.
Just to tell our viewers that Brigadier Dalvi fought in the Battle of the Namkachu in September, October of 1962. And if you look at the map, Namkachu is this valley which is right at the border of Tibet. So it's beyond Sela, it's beyond Bumla, and it's right on the border, and it's a tiny valley in the coming division of that region. And this is where Brigadier Dalvi fought that war and where he was taken prisoner.
Yes, and also the higher military leadership should have allowed the commanders on the ground to take the decisions of location. But there were political decisions being taken at a level much higher than the Div commander, which was General Narenjan Prasad, and my dad. You cannot, first thing about that kind of mountain warfare is to get onto a height, look down on your enemy.
Right.
For political reasons, we were not going to give up a single inch of our territory. So our troops were in a disadvantageous position. The Chinese were looking down on them. So it was a comedy of errors, right from the top down.
So explain to us, Michael, explain the huge distance or this gap between the political leadership sitting in Delhi and Lucknow and men on the ground like your father and his fellow fighting officers.
Jyoti, if I have to go walk from here to my village, which is 2.5 kilometers, I'll do it in 45 minutes. 2.5 kilometers in the hills could be 6 days. We're talking about troops who are ill-clad, who are fighting at 17,000, 18,000 feet. People go mountaineering to those heights, right, with oxygen cylinders, with all sorts of, high-altitude equipment. And the heights there, you probably won't find that kind of height in the Alps. And these boys of ours were fighting with old rifles, with not enough equipment, nothing to dig a trench with.
So let's talk about the 3 or 4 men or the political masters at the time. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Prime Minister, Krishna Menon, Defense Minister of India, and General B.M. Kaul. These are the 3 characters of your father's book, Himalayan Blunder.
These are the 3 characters who didn't even want to read reports like the one written by General Thorat, the defense of Niphar. The knowledgeable, and mind you, all these generals and all these officers we're talking about were all veterans of the Second World War. That was that generation.
Right.
But then for nepotistic reasons or whatever reason, you bring people in because of likes and dislikes, and it's it was a personality cult, and then grandiose
personality cults that Nehru spawned.
Of course. It's all part of, it's a half a century old history. Everybody knows it. You want me to say it? Yes. And then in Colombo airport, you say, I told my army to throw them out.
This is on the 12th of October 1962 when he goes to Colombo for a visit.
Yes,
And he
yes.
speaks to the press at the airport and he says,
And my father, when he was a prisoner, who was guarding him? Like our Jawans. They're also peasant army. They used to play cards with him, or they used to table tennis, take him for a walk. The man who had to be worried about was the commissar, the
political commissar.
Yeah, who would come? He would taunt my father. He would taunt my father with this. Acha, you're going to throw us out. What happened? You're sitting in Lhasa. Who didn't even know where the place was on a map. And then our intelligence inputs, there was a man called B.M. Malik, who was the IB guy. They were feeding this political, the dispensation with, no, the Chinese are not going to do anything. And then, of course, Panditji was Jappi Maroing, Hindi Chini, Bhai. So the whole country was lulled into a false sense of complacency. Nothing's going to happen. Hindi Chini, Bhai. And he was such a towering character. क्या मतलब नहीं होगा नहीं सर चाचा जी ने कह दिया नेहरू साहब ने कह दिया नहीं होगा see what happened because that was it was a self-serving political dispensation. Each one kept vital information from each other, fed each other only that sycophantic information that was that they thought would be beneficial to themselves.
So you hear what you want to hear.
Yes, you hear what you want to hear and you tell the next guy what you think he wants to hear. To hell with the troops and whether they have 303 rifles or they have gym shoes to walk in snow. That's how far is that from the narrative? It wasn't even important. Some troops are there. After all, they've joined the army for what? That kind of attitude.
And then there was...
Start with the fact that they didn't want an army. Why do you need an army? Paramilitary, good enough. Chinese, they're never going to attack us. It's all there in the book. It's there in so many other books.
Right.
And anybody who wants to read Himalayan Blunder must never read it in isolation. It must be read with General Kaul's book, Untold Story, with The Defense of Tawang by the Div Commander, General Niranjan Prasad, Neville Maxwell's book, India's China War, which is, he was the Times correspondent in Delhi at the time.
Right.
He has access to the Henderson Brooks report, Jyoti, in which he put it on his website. Why isn't the government, so many years later, why can't we know what happened? What did General Henderson Brooks and the great Victoria Cross winner, General Bhagat, they had no axe to grind. They told it as it was. Why can't we read that report? There must be some reason. And successive governments. It's not only the Congress government that has sort of buried it.
That's right.
The government has buried it. Why?
Yeah, it's still not in the open. Nobody has access to that book. And in the name of national security.
What is national security? What is meant? I don't know. With national security? Today you have thousands and thousands of troops, Chinese troops on the border. That is a situation which we are tackling now. We have equally, if not better, certainly better trained and better equipped than we were in 62.
So tell me about the third character in this trinity, General B.M. Kaul.
The rumor has it that he was commissioned into the Rajputana Rifles, but then spent the war in the ASC, Supply Corps. Mm-hmm. And then I think it was, my father was deputy commandant at the IMA, and from here he was posted as Brig Adam in 15 Corps in Udhampur. Mm-hmm. And the UOC was General Shiv Verma.
Okay.
And suddenly there was a big upheaval in the higher echelons of the army. Generals were being, superseded, told to go, whatever. And General Shiv Verma was one of them. some flimsy reason. A whole generation of generals was sidelined because it was making way for the likes of General Kaul. So,
because he was Kashmiri.
Once told that he was related to Panditji. Forget, even supposing he was related, but if he was a hands-on general who had seen the war, seen action, had commanded troops. You know, the great thing about commanding troops is the fact that they should have respect for you.
Right.
And there was one thing I heard somewhere where when he left on the back of a Sherpa, of a porter. Now you have, what would your troops think of you?
Where was this? What is describe this story to us?
See, what happened was he was pushing the political line. That is not an inch of our territory and whatever else you heard. Okay, throw them out. And his spiel was that he was dealing with the Prime Minister, the Defense Minister, and the Cabinet. And when the Chinese opened fire, then he says, no, this is serious, John. I am going to Delhi. I'm going to speak to the Prime Minister. Your battle is there in the book. Your battle. Anyway, you come, you agitate the situation. You are aggressive with the enemy. You send troops where you shouldn't have sent troops. And then the mountainside opens fire. Then you say, I'm going to Delhi. Then he goes to Delhi. And what does he do in Delhi, Jyoti? He opens a war room in the military hospital. You must have read that. His room in the military hospital became a war room. So the battle of the Namka Chu and thereafter, when by that time they had almost got to Tawang, was being conducted from a hospital room in Delhi cantonment, military hospital. I mean, what more do you want to hear, Jyoti? I mean, does this not illustrate the kind of goings on? If it was not such a serious matter and so many innocent lives were lost and so much pain, families destroyed, it would be a comedy of errors. And as I said in that thing, these people are criminals. Criminals. How can you send God-fearing, simple troops who believe in you, believe in your in the uniform they wore? Send them to you could have dug their graves yourself and said, go and lie down.
So then your father is taken prisoner on the...
About 2 days later, he would have died anyway because extreme cold, it was October, no food.
This is the 22nd of October, 62.
Yeah, the 20th was the attack, early morning, Chinese attack. And 2 days he was roaming around looking for the rest of his brigade. There was no signals equipment. You couldn't keep in touch with your commanders, your battalion commanders. They were all strewn over the place. And the other thing is in that kind of terrain, they didn't realize how far behind them the Chinese had already advanced.
Right.
So actually when he was taken prisoner, and this is, by the way, PLA has put a propaganda kind of a video clip, which you should see, of him being taken prisoner.
I see.
Yeah, there was no hands up and all. He was just smiling away. Inevitable, I suppose.
So then he's taken prisoner, and for the next 6.5 months.
No, taken prisoner, and that's where he realized the organizational capabilities of the Chinese. They had Operation Theatre vans almost at the front. And they had this propaganda of, see, our Chinese soldier is injured, but we are taking an Indian soldier to be operated, blah, blah, you know, the usual thing. They were equipped with blood transfusion units. I mean, they were organized.
Let me bring you to the tribute that you wrote in his a few days ago on his 100th birth anniversary.
Okay.
And you talk about his guilt that chews him up, that when he returns, because he feels that he let his men down, this izzat of the Paltan that you talk about.
You know, the feeling of letting your troops down. Remember now, try and picture soldiers and officers who are there facing the Chinese, seeing blood and seeing death, and you come to him as a commander. He's seeing his troops being annihilated. He is he is very aware of the fact that they cannot retaliate. They're sitting ducks, they're dying for what? For the prestige of their units, for the flag, for the country. How would anybody feel? And the guilt is that he couldn't have bought the up-to-date rifles for them. He couldn't have. What could he have done? I think they gave him a chicken at Christmas, which he shared with his captors. They gave him eggs twice in that period when he was there. It was a potato kind of fare. It was. He came back he had scurvy. He had all sorts of, because of, it was very cold. It was minus 30, 40 degrees temperature. So there was a muscle atrophication. He was a very, very strong man. I mean, he was very physically powerful. But he came back, he was a shadow of his former self. He was a sportsman, he was a cricketer, he was a very good hockey player. And but none of this physical thing was not the criteria. It was this mental thing of, even though I may not be 100% responsible, could I have done something else? A question which he couldn't answer, which he tried desperately to answer. What could I have done? Actually, what could he have done? Everybody accepts that he couldn't have done anything. Right. But that guilt went with him. It ate into his soul. I mean, it was a daily thing. And then he wanted his people to get awards. I think later on some of them did. If you see that one chapter of the Rajputs, Major Pant, he was exhorting his troops that this is where God has chosen and to defend your country. Not a single man came back. I'm not sure whether he got an award or not, but look at the spirit. He said, this is where it's been chosen for us to die. And he had all sorts of wounds. When the Chinese passed by his body, they bayoneted his body because of what damage he had done to them. They never gave up. So the people who sent them there owed them a lot more than they were given.
What about your father? Did he get a medal? Was he awarded an honor?
He was not only, he was given this, they dangled this in front. Then, see, first of all, the Chinese army was, the Chinese government had, they say sometime in November, had stated that they had prisoners. But till the BBC broke this news in March, the army or this people running the show were very confident that the situation is under control because this useless brigadier who's handed his brigade on a platter to the Chinese, he was dead.
They thought he was dead.
Of course they thought he was dead. Informed my mother that he was dead.
So
missing, believed dead.
They didn't know he had been taken. They didn't know that he had been captured by the Chinese.
No, he was missing. In the hills, who knows?
Right.
But when it was announced by the BBC that he's a prisoner of war, somebody from the Red Cross had met him and he's coming back, then the whole narrative changed. Oh God, this man's going to come back. He's going to tell another story. So by that time, this guy had gone. Krishna Menon had gone, and there's a chap called Y.B. Chavan.
That's right. He
who was
was
a Maratha.
Yeah.
So he met my dad, and in Marathi he told him, "Don't worry, I'll send you to a good posting, home posting, Pune, sub-area commander, and don't worry, you will get your rank of Major General, blah blah blah." But the old man was not in a mood to get another star on his in his pips. He wanted to know what's going to happen about the people who were guilty, who were responsible for this. So they started sidelining him.
No, but can I just ask you here? So Baibi Chavan, then Defense Minister, said to Brigadier Dalvi that, what did he say?
Words to the effect, Jyoti, nobody was there, there was no third person. And my father never spoke of these things in the house. He never spoke about this except with officers of his rank. He had no this thing to talk about these things with junior officers.
Spoke about what?
About the fact that he was offered a promotion, and this has come out somewhere else.
No, in exchange for what?
Sorry?
In exchange for what?
Keeping quiet. Very simple. It's not rocket science that you toe the government line and you'll become a major general.
I'm actually curious to know why he didn't talk about his experiences as a prisoner of war, because in the book, there's this picture of him and some of his other fellow officers, and they're standing in front of the Potala Palace in Lhasa.
You know, that lineup of army officers are some of the finest army officers that this army has had. There's General Ahluwalia, General Mar Singh Rick. I don't think any of them got awards. Balwant Singh Ahluwalia had his shoulder blown off. The guy with the moustache, Colonel Rick, who went on to become a general, had his jaw blown off. Families were... Colonel Mehta never came back. Nobody knows till today where he is. I mean, how can one explain this to the people sitting in air-conditioned army headquarters rooms, Jyoti? How do you explain this?
What skulls and skeletons?
There are skulls and skeletons still lying around there in Nifa of our troops.
How do you know this?
My senior in the Doon school, we called him UV. He's gone on to be the Chief Minister of Punjab. H.H. Patiala was my senior in Tata House and Doon School. He's written some brilliant military books you must read, lest we forget. He went there, and the people who were with him, they saw skeletons. And it's nobody's fault. People got killed, got shot, bodies fell into ravines. It's not like going onto a cricket pitch and finding bodies lying around in mid-off and mid-on. This was terrible terrain. Even till today, I have some photographs, old water canisters, or old ammunition boxes, helmets, old bayonets. I have photographs. And where does it come from? From the internet.
When he comes back, when your father comes back in May 1963, you must have been 17 or 18 years old, a young man yourself, with your mother, your family. How does the family respond to this man, to your father, to your mother's husband coming back?
First of all, let me tell you, they were transported from a place in China called Kunming. Yeah. And they were under the aegis of the Red Cross. So when they get to Dum Dum Airport those days, the undercarriage wouldn't open. So he thought after everybody, after Burma, the Japs, Chinese, Lhasa, Beijing, Peking, I'm going to die in an air crash. Anyway, then the undercarriage came out. I think manually they got it out. They landed. And then he was taken by train to Ranchi for debriefing. And debriefing, the first thing they wanted to know if these guys had become communists. Had they been brainwashed? Did they subscribe to the Chinese propaganda? That was the unkindest cut of all. He got the message, the writing on the wall was clear. that this brigade had to be badnaam karo. They had to be put in a corner so that whatever blame had to accrue to these troops, which was another crime, which was another thing which was on his conscience all along. They fought, gave their lives. What more can you ask of a soldier? I said that, Macaulay, how best can you die? And look at our young soldier, look at Kargil. The guy says, I wish God had given me more than one life to give for my country.
Several of the children of your father's colleagues, who some of them don't live in India. What happened?
Starting. Yeah. So I get this message through a friend of mine who's Dr. Westpace, Leander's father, old friend of mine. He says there's this lady from Perth, I think it was, who's trying to get in touch with you. So I exchanged messages. And her story was that in 62, her mother was 29, she was 5 and her little sister was 2. And the father was missing. I mean, till today they don't know. They've never seen a body. There's no closure. So she asked, can I help? So I said, how can I help? Because she's been to India. She's been to where Sela, he was, I think, probably in Brigadier Hushar's brigade. And remember, the unilateral ceasefire was 21st November.
Yeah.
Brigadier Hushar was killed on the 23rd, and those officers of the Chinese army knew jolly well there was a ceasefire. Still, they killed our troops and brigadier and dumped them into one grave. Coming back to this lady, and she spoke to me for an hour, and she was, it was emotional again. The whole thing came back, and she said, there was a brief period when we thought our father was coming back, and that his name had been taken, and her mother thought that there was a spelling mistake. His name is Johndalby.
I see. John,
Anglo-Indian officer, Captain John Dalby. So this John Dalby, and they were very happy that he's coming back. He's a prisoner, but unfortunately, it was not him. She's in touch with me and she started a WhatsApp group.
And she has
62 children of 62.
Mm-hmm.
And he was an arty man, a gunner, artillery. She's been to the center. She's spoken to his Paltan. Some of the 4 or 5 soldiers, Jawans who were with him. She's been to, I think, Rajasthan and places where these veterans live. Nobody can say what happened. Just look at her situation. At least I know what happened to my dad. The day my dad died, I was sitting by his bed. I know he went. What about this lady? She doesn't know till today, 55, 58 years later, how he died, whether he is dead. And then what happens, not in this case, but very often you live on hope, Jyoti.
Michael Dalby, thank you so much for speaking to the print. And once again, I reiterate on your behalf, and I hope that's okay to do, to all the viewers of this program, that this book, Himalayan Blunder, I have the PDF that Michael has given me so generously. And if any of you want to read it, if you can send your emails in the comment section below, I will send you the PDF of this book. Michael, thank you so much for your time, for sharing.
Welcome. But last thing, if I may, Jyoti, but this book must not be read in isolation. I said that before. Please read it for perspective along with other books.
So some of those...
Lovely talking to you.
Thank you so much for your time. And
Take care.